There was something sacred about the morning air, the kind that lingers in memory, not because it shouts, but because it whispers. On that early Saturday in Savannah, Georgia, a hush lay over the front porch of the Franklin home, broken only by the soft creak of a screen door and the excited shuffle of little sneakers on wood. 8-year-old Noah Franklin stood at the edge of the porch, his Spider-Man backpack strapped tight, his wide eyes scanning the sky as if expecting a plane to appear just for him. It wasn't just any day. It wasn't just any trip. Today he was going to fly. Behind him, his mother Danielle stepped outside holding 2 travel mugs, one for her, one filled with hot chocolate for him. She wore comfortable jeans, a soft navy sweater, and a gentle calm wrapped around her like armor. Her eyes, warm and perceptive, had already caught the flicker of nervous excitement in her son's body language. "You ready, sweet pea?" she asked, handing him the cup. Noah took it with both hands and nodded, his small fingers curling tightly around the warm ceramic. "I've been ready since Wednesday," he said, voice slightly squeaky from anticipation. Danielle chuckled and brushed a strand of hair from her son's forehead. "And do you remember the rules of flying?" "Yes," Noah replied quickly. "Seatbelt stays on unless the light goes off. No pressing random buttons. Be nice to the flight attendants and—" he paused dramatically. "Don't scream during takeoff, even if it feels like a rocket." "That's my boy," Danielle smiled. "Your dad would be proud." At the mention of his father, Noah's face lit up like morning sun on glass. Dr. Nathan Franklin, his hero in every sense, was already in Washington, D.C., having flown out a day early to prepare for his NASA achievement ceremony, a formal recognition of his groundbreaking work in aerospace propulsion. It wasn't every day a black engineer from Georgia was honored on a national stage, and even Noah, at just 8, knew what a big deal this was. Nathan had promised his son that after the plane reached cruising altitude, they could visit the cockpit together. "Just you and me," he'd whispered that morning over FaceTime, like a secret mission. That promise pulsed in Noah's chest like a drumbeat. They made their way to the car as the sun climbed higher, painting the horizon in soft ambers and blues. Noah leaned against the window during the ride, watching as the city slowly gave way to stretches of open road. He imagined clouds swirling beneath him, imagined himself gliding through them with the wings of a superhero. Iron Man had always been his favorite, not just because of the suit, but because of the brains behind the bravery. It reminded him of Dad. At the airport, everything was larger than life. The ceilings reached so high they seemed to brush the sky. Rolling walkways buzzed beneath polished tile. People bustled in waves, wheeling suitcases like tethered dreams. Noah's eyes darted everywhere, absorbing it all. The security officers, the gate signs, even the faint scent of pretzels wafting from a nearby kiosk. "This place is huge," he whispered. Danielle smiled as she held his hand. "Airports are like cities for people on the move. Look at all the stories happening at once." As they approached the check-in counter, Noah bounced slightly on his heels. "Do you think we'll fly over our school? Or the park? What if I see a bird? Will it race us?" The airline agent at the desk chuckled softly, clearly charmed by the boy's curiosity. "First flight?" she asked, glancing up. "Yes, ma'am," Danielle said. "He's very excited." "We're going to NASA," Noah added proudly. "My dad's getting a big award. He builds rockets." The agent smiled with genuine warmth and handed them their boarding passes. "Then I think you're in for a very special ride." Security was its wonder. Noah watched in fascination as trays glided through X-ray machines, belts whirred, and officers scanned screens with careful eyes. He held his breath when his backpack went through, only exhaling in relief when it came out untouched. "Spider-Man is still good luck," he whispered, and Danielle ruffled his curls affectionately. When they reached the gate, the aircraft stood like a sleeping beast just outside the tall glass windows. Its wings stretched wide, glinting in the sun. Noah pressed his face to the glass, awed. "It looks like a spaceship," he murmured. "That's because your dad helped build things that inspired it," Danielle said softly. As the announcement for boarding came over the loudspeaker, Noah grabbed her hand tightly. "I'm ready," he said. And he meant it, not just for the flight, but for whatever came next. The boarding bridge felt like a tunnel to another world. Every step echoed in Noah's chest. When they finally stepped through the aircraft door, they were greeted by the soft hum of air circulation, the subtle scent of clean upholstery, and smiling faces. Smiling faces. For now. Noah took it all in. The rows of blue fabric seats, the ceiling panels with little nozzles and lights, the overhead bins like storage pods from a sci-fi movie. He grinned up at his mother. "This is awesome." Danielle smiled back, but there was a flicker of caution in her eyes. An instinct mothers like her had long learned to carry, especially when entering shared spaces with a black child in tow. They found their seats mid-cabin, right above the wing. Danielle helped Noah buckle in, and he insisted on clicking it himself, just like in the YouTube videos. He peered out the oval window with wonder. "Mom?" he asked softly. "Yes, sweetie. Do you think people can tell this is my first time?" Danielle looked at her son. The joy, the innocence, the belief that the world was full of flight paths and possibilities. She squeezed his hand. "Does it matter?" He paused, then shook his head with a grin. "Nope." And in that moment, nothing else did. The moment Noah Franklin sank into his window seat, he pressed his face against the cool oval glass, wide-eyed. The world outside, luggage carts, orange-vested workers, and aircraft tails lined in neat rows, looked like pieces on a board game, and he was part of it. Every blink, every breath felt like the first in a brand new world. Danielle smiled as she settled into the seat beside him. She had chosen these seats on purpose. Just behind the wing, a sweet spot for both stability and the best view of takeoff. More importantly, she knew how much her son loved symmetry, and this seat aligned perfectly with the engine. To Noah, it wasn't just an engine. It was the pulse of a skybound machine. As other passengers began boarding, the quiet rustle of jackets, overhead bins opening and closing, and the occasional polite "excuse me" filled the cabin with an energetic rhythm. Noah absorbed every sound like it was part of a soundtrack meant just for him. But amid the gentle hum of excitement, Danielle's eyes sharpened for a moment, subtle, instinctual. She had seen it before. Rachel Moore, one of the flight attendants, moved crisply down the aisle. Her uniform was impeccable, her posture tall, her expression polite but distant. She greeted passengers with a smile, bent down for children, and helped a man with a cane adjust his seatbelt. But as she passed their row, something changed. No warm glance, no welcoming tone. Just a mechanical nod. Danielle noticed it instantly. Noah didn't, not yet. Instead, he was too busy inspecting the safety card from the seatback pocket, flipping through the illustrations as if decoding a secret manual. He tapped Danielle on the arm. "Mom, do you think I'd float if the plane went high?" "Like, float?" Danielle chuckled. "Not unless we're in space, honey. And even then, you'd need a suit. You'd bounce around like popcorn." Noah grinned. "Popcorn astronaut, that's me." For a few precious minutes, the moment felt pure again. But then Rachel returned. She was walking back through the cabin with another flight attendant, this time distributing coloring books and crayons to children. A red-haired girl 2 rows up received one with a warm, "Enjoy, sweetheart." The boy across the aisle got 2. "One for now, one for the ride back," Rachel had said, crouching down to meet his eye level. Noah straightened in his seat, watching eagerly. His hands already reached toward the tray table in anticipation. But when Rachel arrived at his row, her smile evaporated. She didn't stop. She didn't speak. She passed them by. Noah blinked, confused. His small hands remained midair for a beat too long before slowly lowering back down to his lap. Danielle saw the shift in her son immediately. His shoulders dropped by a fraction. The sparkle in his eyes dimmed ever so slightly. She leaned in, her voice gentle. "You okay, baby?" Noah hesitated. "She gave coloring books to them," he said quietly, nodding toward the children nearby. "I saw," Danielle replied. "She didn't give me one." Danielle's throat tightened, but she steadied herself. "Maybe she ran out," she said, though she didn't believe it. Noah nodded, but something inside him had already registered a difference he couldn't name. The captain's voice came over the intercom just then. Deep, calm, assuring. He mentioned clear skies, a smooth flight, and a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Noah listened carefully, then whispered, 35,000. That's higher than Mount Everest, right? Much higher, Danielle said, grateful for the change in focus. The plane began to taxi, and Noah leaned hard against the window. Here we go, he breathed almost to himself. The rumble beneath their feet turned into a roar, a vibration that coursed up through the seats and into their spines. Danielle glanced sideways and saw him gripping the armrest with one hand and her sleeve with the other. Then the wheels lifted. Gravity released its grip. The aircraft rose. Noah gasped. Below them, Savannah shrank into toy cars and gray ribbons of road. Clouds approached like giant cotton islands, and just like that, they were above the world. Mom, he whispered, it's like flying in a dream. Danielle smiled, brushing her fingers through his curls. That's the magic. For the next stretch of the flight, everything seemed to return to wonder. Noah opened his flight journal, a small notebook decorated with stickers of stars and planets, and began sketching what he saw outside. The wing cutting through clouds, the sun reflecting off the metal. Danielle leaned back, finally relaxing, but peace was fleeting. Rachel returned, this time with the beverage cart. She moved smoothly down the aisle, taking drink orders and offering pretzels with practiced charm. The family in front of them received juice and warm smiles. A man across the aisle got extra napkins. Noah sat up a little straighter, folding his tray down. He glanced at Danielle for confirmation. She nodded. It's okay, baby. When Rachel reached their row, her demeanor changed again. No eye contact, no smile. Juice or water? She asked flatly. Juice, please, Danielle replied calmly, maintaining grace. Rachel handed them the drinks wordlessly, then moved on without offering pretzels, without a second glance. Noah stared at his cup. Did I say something wrong? He asked softly. Danielle turned to face him fully. Her voice was gentle but firm. No, sweetheart, you were respectful. You didn't do anything wrong. He nodded slowly, looking away. The joy of flight hadn't vanished completely, but it had dimmed, and Danielle could see it, in the way he fidgeted with the straw, in the silence where laughter should have lived. She wanted to wrap him in 1,000 reassurances, but she also knew this was only the beginning. In the seat beside her, her son was learning, not just about air pressure and aerodynamics, but about the world, and about how it could sometimes quietly deny kindness. Even 35,000 feet above the earth, injustice found a way to follow. At 35,000 feet, you'd think clouds were the only thing you had to worry about. But as Noah Franklin sat quietly in his seat, his untouched cup of orange juice trembling slightly in its holder, the tension he felt didn't come from turbulence. It came from something colder, something he didn't have words for yet. He watched Rachel Moore, the flight attendant, glide past once more, this time smiling sweetly at the child 2 rows ahead, crouching to ask about his favorite superhero and offering him not just a cookie pack, but a second just in case. The boy giggled, his mother beaming with gratitude. Rachel's laugh, though a bit rehearsed, had warmth in it. But when she reached Noah's row again, her face turned blank. Her steps quickened. Her gaze avoided his. He wasn't offered a second look, let alone a second cookie. Noah's fingers tightened on the edges of his tray table. Mom, he whispered, eyes tracking Rachel's polished shoes as they disappeared down the aisle. Why doesn't she talk to me like the other kids? Danielle closed her eyes for the briefest second. She had hoped this moment wouldn't come. Not here, not on this day, not on what was supposed to be a memory made of wonder and pride, but life had a way of showing up uninvited, even in the sky. She looked at her son, his expression searching, a quiet ache blooming in his young eyes. Maybe she's just busy, honey, she said softly. Or maybe she doesn't know how to smile at everyone the same way. But it's not because of anything you did. Noah nodded slowly, though his shoulders still slumped just a little. He turned back toward the window, the clouds now slightly less magical. From a few rows up, the sound of children laughing reached his ears. Rachel's voice was cheerful again, asking one little boy what kind of animal he wanted to be if he could fly. A bald eagle, the boy shouted proudly. Noah turned to Danielle. I would have said a falcon, he murmured. She reached over and squeezed his hand. I know, baby. You've always loved speed. He smiled faintly but didn't speak. Minutes passed in quiet. Danielle pulled out a crossword puzzle but found her eyes drifting back to her son. He was scribbling in his journal again, not sketching this time, but writing. She didn't peek, but she suspected it wasn't about clouds anymore. Noah's thoughts were tangled. He didn't want to ruin the trip. He knew today was important, Dad's big day at NASA, and he wanted to be brave. But every time Rachel walked by without even seeing him, a small stone landed in his chest. Not enough to crush him, but enough to weigh him down. He took a deep breath, opened his cookie pack, and bit one slowly. Danielle turned toward him. Do you want to ask for a coloring book? Or maybe just a refill of juice? He hesitated. Can I? Of course. With cautious hope, Noah raised his hand slightly the next time he saw Rachel approaching. He didn't wave, didn't shout, just lifted it quietly, respectfully, the way his teachers had taught him. Rachel stopped, but not kindly. Her face tightened. Her eyes narrowed. Yes? She asked, tone clipped. Noah's voice was small. May I please have some cookies? Rachel let out a sharp breath, just loud enough for Danielle to hear. She reached into her cart and handed over a single cookie pack with no word, no smile. As she turned to leave, she muttered under her breath, Kids these days are so demanding. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. Noah's hand froze midair, and the cookie pack was barely touched. Danielle sat up straighter. Her voice when it came was cool but firm. He was just being polite. Rachel didn't respond. She kept walking. The silence left behind was thick and bitter. Noah stared at the cookie pack in his palm, like it might explode. I didn't mean to be rude, he said quietly. Danielle's heart twisted. She leaned in close, brushing a hand through his curls. Sweetheart, she said gently, you were kind. That's all that matters. When someone else chooses to be unkind, it's not your fault. Noah nodded, but his appetite was gone. He placed the cookies on the tray table, untouched. His thoughts felt heavier now, clouded by something he couldn't yet name. It didn't make sense. Why some kids got smiles and stickers, and he got silence. Why being polite still made someone sigh. Outside the window, the sky was still blue, the clouds still perfect, but the magic had dulled. He leaned his forehead against the pane and watched the wing cut cleanly through the air, steady and strong. Mom, he said after a while, still looking outside, do you think she doesn't like me? Danielle paused. There were 100 ways to answer that question, but only one felt honest. I think, she said slowly, some people carry things inside them that they haven't fixed, and sometimes they take it out on others, especially people who look different from what they're used to. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It means they have work to do. Noah nodded again, eyes thoughtful. So, her smile's broken? Danielle blinked, surprised by the simplicity and the accuracy of the question. Yes, she said softly. Maybe that's exactly it. They sat quietly for a while after that. No coloring books, no chatter. Just mother and son, side by side, wrapped in a silence that was no longer peaceful, but necessary. From across the aisle, an elderly woman looked toward them with a faint frown. Her gaze lingered just long enough to say, I saw that. I saw what she did. But she said nothing. As Rachel passed by once more, this time without stopping, Noah didn't raise his hand. He looked at her shoes, then down at his lap, and quietly resumed drawing. But what he drew this time wasn't a rocket or a cloud or a superhero. It was a wall with cracks running down the middle. By the time the cabin lights dimmed for mid-flight rest, the thrill that once danced in Noah Franklin's eyes had faded into quiet caution. He sat back in his seat, legs gently swinging, but no longer with excitement, just as a habit of waiting. Waiting for kindness. Waiting to be seen. Danielle noticed every shift in his posture. It was subtle, the way he had begun to shrink into himself, the way his hands now hovered before reaching for anything, as if checking for permission from the air itself, the way he glanced sideways before asking even the smallest questions. Noah had always been a gentle soul, but not a timid one, until today, and Danielle knew exactly why. Across the cabin, Rachel Moore continued her practiced routine, pouring coffee, collecting trash, smiling for cameras that weren't there. Her mask of professionalism remained impeccable. But to Danielle, it was paper thin. She could see the difference in how Rachel's smile softened for some passengers, then vanished entirely when passing others, as if kindness was a performance only some seats paid to witness. Noah sipped his juice slowly, still untouched by the cookie pack resting neatly on his tray. He glanced around. The kids across the aisle were laughing again. Rachel had returned with crayons, more snacks, and had even asked one boy if he wanted to visit the cockpit at the end of the flight. Her voice had sparkled when she said it. Noah's fingers twitched at the mention of the cockpit. His father's promise echoed in his memory like a beacon. Once we're cruising, I'll show you the cockpit. It'll be our secret, just you and me. He leaned toward Danielle. Mom, he whispered. Yes, baby. Do you think I can still ask to see Dad in the cockpit? Danielle looked at her son. His eyes, still bright beneath the cloud of disappointment, were holding on to hope with trembling hands. She hesitated for half a second too long, and it told Noah everything. I don't have to, he said quickly, looking down. I just thought, no, Danielle cut in gently. You absolutely can. That's your father, and he asked you to come. He nodded, trying to mask his growing uncertainty. Moments later, Rachel approached again with a refill cart. Danielle took a breath and leaned forward slightly. Excuse me, she said politely. Could we get a little more water, please? Rachel didn't stop walking. I'll come back later, she muttered flatly over her shoulder, though the cart was already there, and her hand had just served the row behind. Noah's mouth opened slightly, confusion rising. But, he began. Danielle placed a gentle hand on his arm, shaking her head slightly. She didn't want him to feel the sting twice, but it was too late. Noah's expression tightened. He swallowed hard and turned back to his window. The sky outside remained as serene as ever, layers of cream-colored clouds floating beneath a pale blue canvas. But the injustice simmering in his small chest had begun to solidify into something heavier. She heard you, he said finally. She just didn't want to stop. Danielle exhaled slowly, deliberately, like someone trying to lower their blood pressure with nothing but air and grace. I know, she replied. Why? Noah's voice was smaller now. We asked nicely. Because you are a black boy in economy class. Because some people still see your skin before your manners. Because decency for some has limits. Danielle could have said any of those things, but she couldn't. Not yet. So she said what she could. Because sometimes people forget how to treat others with the kindness everyone deserves. Noah nodded but didn't answer. His hands had returned to his lap, fidgeting with a loose thread on his jeans. Danielle knew the thread wasn't the only thing beginning to unravel. A few rows up, a flight attendant handed out blankets with a smile, asking passengers if they were warm enough. Another child received a second set of headphones because the first one looked tangled. A man asked for a ginger ale, and it was brought with an extra napkin and a wink. Meanwhile, their row sat untouched. The invisibility was louder than words. It was in the way Rachel only addressed Danielle, never Noah directly. It was in the glances that skimmed past their faces. It was in the speed with which she moved past, as though pausing in their presence might somehow cost her more than time. And yet Noah still tried. He raised his hand again, politely, quietly. Excuse me, ma'am? He asked when Rachel passed once more. Her eyes barely flicked toward him. What is it now? She sighed. I was wondering, could I please get some water? Rachel didn't respond. She didn't even look. She kept walking. Noah's hand remained midair for a few seconds too long before it slowly sank back to his lap. Danielle watched the moment that fractured her son's spirit in real time. The disbelief, the embarrassment, the silent realization that sometimes being kind wasn't enough to be seen. Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly, trying to be strong, trying not to ruin the trip, trying not to need anything. Danielle reached over and placed her hand firmly over his. You did nothing wrong, she said again, more forcefully this time. You were polite. You asked with respect. Noah didn't look up, but she didn't answer. Danielle's jaw clenched. She didn't want her son to carry the weight of this moment alone. She raised her hand, calm, measured, as if giving the universe one more chance to be decent. "Excuse me," she called. Rachel stopped at last, turning around as if inconvenienced. "Yes?" she asked, voice sharp. "My son asked for some water, very politely," Danielle said evenly. "Could you please bring us some?" Rachel hesitated, her face unreadable. Then, without a word, she retrieved a cup and handed it to Danielle, not to Noah, before briskly turning away. Danielle handed the cup to her son. "Thank you," Noah whispered. But the sip was hesitant. He drank it like someone who wasn't thirsty anymore, but needed something, anything, to steady himself. And Danielle knew it wasn't water he needed, it was dignity. The hum of the engines deepened as the aircraft soared steadily through the upper sky. But inside row 22, time began to move differently. For Noah Franklin, the last hour felt like a slow unraveling, not of the flight itself, but of the wonder he had once carried so proudly when they first stepped aboard. The cookie remained untouched. The drawing in his flight journal had turned into scribbled shadows, and while the other children across the aisle leaned eagerly against their parents, whispering about clouds and wings and where the plane might be now, Noah had grown quieter, still polite, still respectful, but dulled. But then something flickered behind his eyes. A memory, a promise. "Once we're up and steady," his father had said that morning, smiling from the business class lounge before boarding, "I'll ask the crew to let you peek into the cockpit. Just you and me, little man. Deal?" Noah clung to that memory now like a kite string, tugging him upward through everything that had gone wrong so far. He turned to Danielle, hopeful again for the first time in what felt like hours. "Mom?" he asked. "Do you think I can go find Dad now? I think it's been long enough." Danielle hesitated. Her motherly instincts sharpened instantly, aware of who guarded the space between economy and business class. But then she saw something else, something stronger in her son's eyes. Hope, and she refused to be the one to dim it. "I think it's a good time," she said softly. "You remember which seat number he's in?" "1A," Noah said proudly, standing just a little taller. Danielle smoothed his shirt, then squeezed his hand. "Just walk slowly, and if someone stops you, tell them you're looking for your dad, okay?" He nodded, then stepped carefully into the aisle. Small steps, shoulders straight, his Spider-Man socks peeked out from his sneakers as he made his way toward the curtain that separated his row from the front of the plane. The curtain, light gray and silky, fluttered gently from the air vents above. To most passengers, it meant nothing, just fabric. But to Noah, it was a boundary, a symbol, the line between where he was allowed to be and where he hoped to belong, even just for a minute. He reached for the edge, fingertips brushing the fabric. Then came the voice. "Hey, young man!" Noah froze. The air in the cabin stilled. Rachel Moore stood behind him, her posture rigid, her tone slicing through the quiet hum like a blade. "Where do you think you're going?" Noah turned slowly, caught in her gaze like a deer in headlights. I just wanted to see my dad," he said softly, his voice barely more than a breath. "He said I could come. He's up there, in 1A. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Her voice, low but cutting, echoed across several rows. "This area is for business class passengers only. You need to return to your seat immediately." Her words weren't just firm, they were accusatory, as if Noah had done something wrong, as if being polite, and hopeful somehow made him a threat. Danielle had already unbuckled, rising quietly from her seat. Her steps were calm, but her presence was like thunder held beneath velvet. She reached her son and placed her hand on his back gently, protectively. "He's just going to see his father," she said evenly, meeting Rachel's eyes. "His father asked him to come." Rachel didn't flinch. "Rules are rules. Passengers from economy are not allowed up front." Danielle's jaw tightened. Her eyes never left Rachel's. "His father is the man in 1A. He works for NASA. They're honoring him this afternoon in D.C. Rachel scoffed. "I don't care who his father is. You people always think you're exceptions to everything." There it was. Not even hidden. Not even masked. The phrase "you people" cracked like lightning across the silence, and the entire cabin heard it. The mood shifted instantly, as though oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Noah stepped back instinctively, his shoulders curling toward himself. His voice faltered. "I wasn't trying to break any rules," he whispered. "I just wanted to see my dad." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Go back to your seat," she snapped, "and be glad I'm not reporting this to the captain." The shock washed over him before the tears came. His face, flushed with embarrassment, turned to Danielle, who pulled him to her side with both arms. "Enough," Danielle said quietly, but with steel in her voice. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be, because at that moment, everyone was listening. A young couple across the aisle stared in disbelief. An elderly woman nearby shook her head slowly, eyes brimming with both sorrow and anger. Whispers began to ripple through the rows behind them. The passengers had seen enough and heard too much. Noah buried his face into his mother's side. The curtain he had once looked at with awe now loomed like a wall built just for him, a message written in fabric. "You don't belong here." Danielle's arms held him close, but her gaze never left Rachel's. "There are ways to enforce policies," she said with a calm fierceness. "And there are ways to humiliate a child. You chose the second." Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but stopped, because just then, a voice came from the front cabin. Clear, commanding, familiar. "What's going on back here?" And from behind the curtain, Dr. Nathan Franklin appeared. In his tailored Navy suit, his NASA pin gleaming on his lapel, he looked every bit the part of a man who had shaped the future of flight. But in that moment, he wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a keynote speaker. He was a father. And what he saw, his son crumpled in Danielle's arms, Rachel standing stiffly over them, a cabin frozen in discomfort, told him everything. He stepped forward, and the entire plane held its breath. The curtain fluttered once, and then it parted. Dr. Nathan Franklin, towering in presence, though never needing to raise his voice, emerged from the forward cabin with a calm gravity that made even the humming engines seem to pause. His frame was tall, his shoulders broad under the navy blue of his tailored suit, but it was not the clothes that commanded attention. It was the look in his eyes that found his son first. Noah curled into Danielle's arms, his small body trembling with the weight of public humiliation. Nathan's jaw tightened. His steps forward were quiet but deliberate, the way only someone who had stood in many rooms of power knew how to walk. Not rushing, not storming, but radiating purpose. He didn't glance at the flight attendant immediately. His focus was entirely on his child. "Noah," he said, voice low, tender, measured. Noah lifted his face, streaked with silent tears. The second he saw his father, a breath caught in his chest, the kind that carried both relief and aching all at once. "Dad," he choked out. Nathan dropped to one knee, uncaring of the aisle's narrowness or the staring passengers. He opened his arms and Noah moved into them instantly, bearing his face into his father's chest like a bird finally home. "I'm here now," Nathan whispered into his son's hair. "You're safe, son. No one should ever make you feel small. Not ever." There was a stillness to the moment, one so complete that the plane, the passengers, the tension, they all seemed to freeze around the three of them. The whispers that had filled the cabin before had vanished. No one moved. Rachel Moore stood motionless, clutching the handle of the service cart like it could anchor her. But it couldn't. Not now, because Nathan slowly stood. And then, finally, he turned to face her. His expression had changed. Not harsh, not cruel, but unmistakably firm. Like a courtroom door closing. Like a sentence about to be read. "Miss," he began calmly, "would you like to explain to me why my son was publicly scolded and shamed, simply for trying to see his father?" Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Nathan didn't blink. "He asked politely," he continued, "to see me, his father, whom he knew was sitting in seat 1A. He followed the rules. He walked calmly. He spoke respectfully. And yet you chose to make an example out of him." Rachel straightened reflexively. "Sir, I was enforcing airline policy. Passengers from economy." "Spare me," Nathan said. "Not cruelly, but with a tone so precise it sliced through the script she was trying to recite. Enforcing policy does not require humiliation. It does not require contempt. And it certainly does not require saying, "people like you," in front of dozens of witnesses. A ripple passed through the cabin. Heads nodded. Someone murmured, "That's right." Another voice, "I heard it too." Rachel flushed. Her fingers fidgeted with her uniform. But Nathan wasn't done. "Let me introduce myself properly," he said, raising his voice just enough for the entire section to hear. "I'm Dr. Nathan Franklin, lead propulsion engineer for the Artemis Initiative at NASA. The very initiative that's making headlines this week for our new engine design, something I've been honored to lead. Today I'm on this flight because I've been invited to speak at NASA headquarters. But none of that," he added, voice sharpening, "should matter when it comes to how you treat my son." Danielle stepped forward, standing beside her husband, her hand resting gently on Noah's shoulder. Her eyes never left Rachel's. "We didn't ask for special treatment," she said. "We asked for basic respect." Rachel looked like she wanted to vanish. Passengers around them leaned into the moment. The energy had shifted entirely. There was no turning away from it now. This wasn't just about Noah anymore. It had become something much larger. A reckoning. A reckoning in row 22. "I watched you hand out coloring books to every other child in this cabin," Nathan said. "I watched you crouch and smile, ask about superheroes, make jokes. My son didn't even get eye contact. He asked for a cup of water. You ignored him. My wife had to ask twice." Rachel swallowed, eyes darting toward the back of the cabin. But there was no exit, no cover. Nathan's tone remained steady. "Tell me, what part of your airline training encourages you to overlook polite requests from black children? Which module teaches you how to pretend not to hear them?" That line landed. Audible gasps, more murmurs. The couple across the aisle exchanged stunned looks. An older man at the rear muttered, "I hope the captain hears about this." Noah looked up at his father with wide eyes, eyes that were finally beginning to soften, to release the tightness that had gripped them since the curtain first stopped him. "I didn't do anything wrong, right, Dad?" he asked quietly. Nathan turned back to him and knelt again. "No," he said, placing both hands on his son's shoulders. "You were polite, you were kind, and you stood tall, even when someone tried to push you down. I'm proud of you, so proud." Noah blinked hard and nodded. Rachel tried once more. Her voice was shaky now, stripped of authority. I apologize. I didn't mean to." Nathan stood again. "You did. Whether you meant to or not, you did. And now every person on this plane knows it." Behind them, the curtain to the front opened again. This time it was the captain. A tall, silver-haired man in a Navy uniform stepped into the scene. Behind him stood the lead flight attendant, clearly having been informed by concerned passengers. The captain's eyes swept the aisle, landing on Rachel, then on the Franklin family. And he spoke. "I've been made aware of the incident," he said, "and I want to apologize on behalf of this airline. Mr. and Mrs. Franklin, Dr. Franklin," he added, correcting himself with a glance at Nathan's lapel pin, "this is not who we are, and it is certainly not who we strive to be." Rachel stood still as the captain turned to her. "Given the seriousness of this event," he said evenly, "you're relieved of duties for the remainder of the flight. Please return to the galley." The silence in the cabin broke like a dam. A wave of quiet applause began, first in the back, then moving forward. Not loud, not theatrical, but deliberate. A slow, rising tide of passengers choosing sides. And this time, Noah Franklin was not invisible. As the scattered applause slowly faded, Rachel Moore stood like a statue at the center of a storm she had helped create. Her hands clutched the service card. Her shoulders rose stiffly beneath the scrutiny of an entire cabin that now saw her clearly. Not as a professional, not as a steward of service, but as someone who had chosen who to see and who to ignore. And Noah Franklin, just 8 years old, had been on the wrong side of that choice. With the captain's command hanging in the air, Rachel didn't argue. She didn't apologize again. She simply nodded, pale and rattled, and turned toward the rear galley. As she retreated, the space she left behind seemed to inhale, a release, a reset. But what remained was not silence, it was true. And that truth had faces now. Faces of every passenger who had watched, heard, and now reflected on the quiet violence of what had occurred. Microaggressions gave air and consequence. In that moment, the aircraft cabin became more than rows of seating. It became a mirror. Danielle wrapped her arm protectively around Noah, who leaned against her with a weariness far beyond his years. Dr. Nathan Franklin stood steady, still in the aisle, aware that this moment wasn't over. Not yet. The lead flight attendant, a soft-spoken woman named Jillian, approached carefully, her face apologetic, her voice quiet but certain. Dr. Franklin, Mrs. Franklin, we are sincerely sorry. If it's all right with you, we've arranged for the three of you to move to the front cabin so you can be together. Nathan turned to Danielle. She looked down at Noah, who nodded, not because he craved luxury, but because he needed safety. Proximity to his father, distance from pain. Nathan offered a grateful nod to Jillian. Thank you. As they gathered their few things, the passengers nearby gently moved to the side, many murmuring soft affirmations. We're sorry. He didn't deserve that. You handled that with such grace. One elderly woman placed her hand lightly on Danielle's shoulder as she passed, whispering, You are raising him right. Danielle offered a soft smile of gratitude, but her heart was still heavy. Not for herself, for Noah. As they approached the front cabin, the curtain no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a veil finally pulled back, revealing not privilege, but clarity. Once seated together in row one, Noah sat between his parents, his small body leaning first against Danielle, then slowly shifting toward Nathan. His father gently slid an arm around him, steady and warm. Nathan didn't speak right away. He simply let his presence speak for itself, a quiet fortress for his son. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his suit and pulled out a small pin, a NASA mission badge, just like the one he wore. He handed it to Noah with reverence. You earned this today, he said quietly. Noah took the pin in his hand, surprised. But I didn't do anything. Nathan shook his head slowly. You did everything, son. You stayed kind. You stayed respectful. Even when someone tried to take your joy. That's what real strength looks like. Danielle reached over and kissed the top of Noah's head. And you didn't let someone else's coldness make you cold too. That's how you win. Noah looked at the badge, then at both of them. His voice was small. Why did she treat me like that? Nathan exhaled. He knew this conversation would come one day, but he hadn't expected it to arrive at 35,000 feet. Some people, he said carefully, are taught to fear what they don't understand. And sometimes they see someone like you, smart, kind, confident, and instead of celebrating that, they feel threatened by it. Noah frowned. But I didn't do anything to her. I know, Nathan said. That's what makes it so unfair. But it's not about you. It's about them, their limits, their ignorance. And when you grow up, you'll learn that your job isn't to carry their burdens, but to stand tall despite them. Noah nodded slowly, then looked out the window again. The clouds were still there, still bright, still endless. But now he saw them differently, and so did everyone else. Back in the economy, the conversations had shifted. Quiet debates emerged between couples. Some asked questions they had never thought to voice aloud. One man in a blazer turned to his wife and said, I never realized how easy it is to overlook moments like that until you see them unfold. Another woman, cradling a toddler in her lap, whispered to herself, what if that had been my child? Even the captain, now back in the cockpit, sent word to ground control, requesting that a formal report be filed. The crew would handle it. But the story, the weight of it, would follow them to the terminal. In the front cabin, Jillian returned with a fresh tray, juice for Noah, water for Danielle, and coffee for Nathan. She placed it gently on their tray tables and bent slightly to meet Noah's eyes. I heard everything, sweetheart, she said, her voice sincere. And I just want you to know, you matter. You were wonderful today, and I'm proud of you. Noah smiled faintly. Thank you. As Jillian left, Nathan looked down at his son, who now seemed lighter, still a little shaken, but standing on new ground. Can I still see the cockpit later? Noah asked. Nathan's lips curved into a soft smile. Not only will you see it, I'll walk you in myself, just like we planned. Noah's eyes sparkled again, brighter even than before. And as the aircraft continued its path toward Washington, a new clarity settled over the family. What had begun as a journey filled with innocent wonder had become a trial by quiet injustice. But through grace, strength, and dignity, they had not only endured it, they had transformed it, for themselves, and for everyone watching. The final hour of the flight unfolded with a calmness that felt earned, like silence settling after a storm. But it wasn't the kind of quiet born of comfort. It was the silence of reflection, of passengers weighing what they had just witnessed and what it meant. In row one, Noah Franklin leaned comfortably between his parents, the weight in his chest slowly lifting, bit by bit, his fingers curled around the NASA mission badge his father had given him earlier. It wasn't just metal and thread. It was a new kind of shield, forged not from fame but from truth. The curtain behind them, once a symbol of separation, now hung open. Intentionally. The lead flight attendant, Jillian, had ordered it so, because sometimes, even in the sky, walls needed to fall. She passed by softly, checking in on the family. "Can I bring anything else?" she asked. Nathan looked up. "We're okay now. Thank you." Danielle added, "Really, we appreciate how you stepped in." Jillian nodded, her expression sincere. No child should feel like a disruption on their first flight. That never should have happened, and it won't be brushed aside. Her words were quiet but resolute. Just then, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, clear and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to take a brief moment to address an incident that occurred on board today. While I can't go into full detail, I want you to know that our crew has taken action, and appropriate steps are being documented. This airline does not tolerate discriminatory behavior in any form. Every passenger, every child deserves respect. Thank you for your understanding, and we look forward to a safe landing shortly." A beat of silence followed, and then, as if by unspoken agreement, the passengers throughout the cabin, economy and business alike, began to clap. Not a round of applause for entertainment, but recognition, validation, and Noah, hearing the sound swell behind him, looked up at his father with wide eyes. "Are they clapping for us?" Nathan smiled, placing a warm hand on his son's back. "They're clapping because the truth made it to the surface, and it was heard." Danielle leaned down, brushing a curl off Noah's forehead. "Sometimes," she said, "you don't have to shout to change things. You just have to stand firm and let people see what they tried to ignore." Noah looked thoughtful. He turned in his seat, glanced through the open curtain at the cabin behind him. He didn't see walls anymore. He saw faces, some smiling softly at him, some nodding respectfully, others just sitting quietly, changed by something they might not yet be able to name. Back in the rear galley, Rachel Moore stood with her arms folded, her name tag slightly askew, her entire world now refracted through a single choice, a choice not to see. The whispers she heard now weren't Noah's polite requests. They were the murmurs of passengers, of the flight crew, of consequences. The captain had already submitted an in-flight report to the airline's central command. HR and corporate would be waiting at the gate, and for Rachel, the descent of the aircraft wasn't the only fall in motion. In row 22, where it all began, the seats she had walked past coldly now held passengers whispering about corporate policy, crew ethics, and that NASA engineer who stood up like a real leader. Near the exit door, a young couple drafted an email on a tablet, witness testimony. Another passenger quietly reviewed her phone, looking up the name Nathan Franklin and reading headlines about the genius behind NASA's next leap. But this story wouldn't be about engineering. It would be about character. 30 minutes from landing, Jillian returned with a final gesture. She knelt slightly beside Noah, offering him a crisp envelope with the airline's logo embossed in silver. "We've arranged something for you," she said. Noah tilted his head. "What is it?" Danielle opened the envelope gently, pulling out a neatly folded certificate. At the top, bold letters read, "Junior Aviator Honorary Certificate for Courage and Grace in the Sky." Noah blinked. "Is this real?" Jillian nodded, smiling. "It's very real. And it's yours. Nathan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You earned it, not just for flying, but for facing something harder than altitude, and doing it with your head high. Tears welled in Danielle's eyes, not from sorrow, but from seeing her son acknowledged, affirmed, restored. Noah looked down at the certificate. Then he looked up at Jillian and asked softly, will other kids get this too someday? Jillian paused. If they show the kind of strength you did, absolutely. He nodded, satisfied. Then came the announcement. Flight crew, prepare for landing. The plane began its slow descent through soft cloud layers. Light turbulence rocked the cabin gently, but the family in row 1 sat steady, anchored in something stronger than seatbelts. As the wheels touched down, the landing gear screeching softly against the runway, the story that began in quiet dismissal now ended in public dignity. The aircraft taxied toward the gate. As the doors opened and passengers stood to gather belongings, people turned, not just to disembark, but to connect. One by one, they spoke. A businessman in a gray suit. Thank you, Dr. Franklin, for how you handled it. A woman holding a baby. Your son is brave. And so are you. A teenage boy passing by paused, fist-bumped Noah, and said, respect. Noah smiled, a real one this time. Not forced, not cautious. Danielle took his hand, Nathan gathered their carry-ons, and together they moved toward the exit. As they stepped off the plane, greeted by sunlight pouring through the jet bridge windows, it wasn't just another arrival. It was an arrival into truth, into recognition, and into a world that, at least on this day, had seen a family stand tall and been forced to look up. The air inside the jet bridge was warm with sunlight, like a spotlight diffused through glass. For most passengers, stepping off the plane was the final note in a journey. For Noah Franklin and his parents, it was the beginning of something larger than the flight, larger even than the moment that had shattered his sense of safety. It was the start of a ripple, and the world was already listening. As they walked toward the terminal, Danielle's hand holding Noah's, and Dr. Nathan Franklin guiding their small luggage with one steady pull, the glass wall ahead revealed something unexpected. A small crowd had gathered near the arrival gate, not just travelers but airport personnel, 2 suited individuals with ID badges, and a couple of reporters, cameras discreet but ready. Nathan slowed his pace, his instinct for professional protocol sharpening. Danielle noticed it too. Noah, unaware, clutched his new junior aviator certificate in one hand, the other still holding tight to his mother's. Why are there so many people waiting? He asked, curiosity creeping back into his voice. Danielle glanced toward Nathan. Looks like word travels faster than luggage. A representative from the airline, a woman in her early 40s with a calm but serious expression, stepped forward. Her blazer bore the airline's crest, and she extended her hand. Dr. Franklin, Mrs. Franklin, she said carefully, my name is Michelle Torrance, Director of Passenger Relations for Eastern Skies. We've been briefed by the flight crew and the captain. First and foremost, I want to offer you and your family a formal apology for everything that occurred on board. Her voice was composed, but her eyes were deeply sincere. Nathan nodded once, accepting the gesture without softening. Apologies are a start, he said, measured. What matters is what happens next. Michelle gave a short nod of agreement. We understand that, and I want you to know, we've already initiated an internal investigation. Ms. Moore has been removed from duty pending review, but more importantly, we're preparing to launch a training overhaul for our crew on implicit bias and passenger dignity. Not just a statement, a shift. Danielle stepped forward. Good, she said plainly, because what happened up there didn't just bruise our child, it exposed something systemic. Before Michelle could respond, a reporter stepped gently into the scene, microphone lowered, camera at a respectful distance. Dr. Franklin, I'm with WNT News. May I ask, do you plan to speak publicly about what happened? Nathan looked down at Noah. The boy was now looking up at his father, not with fear, not with shame, but with a cautious kind of pride. Like someone watching a door he didn't think he could open, it began to swing wide. I will, Nathan replied, not for attention, but because too many families have gone through what we just did and left in silence. That silence ends today. The reporter nodded, lifting the mic slightly. Would you mind sharing a message for other parents or kids who may have experienced similar things? Nathan placed a hand gently on Noah's shoulder. Then he looked directly into the lens. My son did everything right, he said, his voice low but resonant. He was kind. He was respectful. He followed the rules. And still he was made to feel small, not because of his behavior, but because of his appearance. A few camera clicks echoed faintly behind them. We live in a time, Nathan continued, when a child's skin color should never determine the amount of respect they're offered on a plane or anywhere else. We're not asking for special treatment. We're demanding basic human dignity. He paused and then added, if that makes someone uncomfortable, it says more about them than about us. Danielle watched the crew around them shift, not nervously, but thoughtfully. Even the camera operator, a young Latina woman, had tears glistening quietly at the corners of her eyes. Noah, feeling the heat of so many gazes, leaned closer to his father and whispered, did I do okay? Nathan looked at him and smiled. You did more than okay, son. You changed the atmosphere. And he meant it. Within hours, the story was on the move. The captain's intercom statement had been recorded by a passenger and shared online. The moment Nathan confronted Rachel mid-flight had been retold in tweets and hashtags. The quote, enforcing policy does not require humiliation, had already been shared thousands of times. The photo of Noah holding his junior aviator certificate, flanked by his parents, was quickly becoming a symbol of quiet courage, of accountability at altitude, and of a family who turned discrimination into clarity. Later that afternoon, the Eastern Skies Airlines official account released a statement. We stand with the Franklin family. There is no seat high enough to excuse prejudice. Immediate measures are being taken. Our skies must reflect the world we claim to serve, diverse, respectful, and safe for all. And still the ripple expanded. At NASA's headquarters, the award ceremony, originally intended to celebrate Nathan Franklin's propulsion innovations, was opened with a different tone. A senior NASA director stood before the podium and addressed a hushed room. Before we honor the scientific achievements of Dr. Nathan Franklin, we honor the personal example he set today as a father, a leader, and an American who dared to turn injustice into purpose. At 35,000 feet, the room rose in applause before Nathan even stepped onto the stage. Back at the hotel, Noah sat at the edge of the bed, watching the news scroll across the TV. His face, his father's arm around him, that little certificate in hand, now projected into living rooms across the country. Mom? He asked, tugging gently at Danielle's sleeve. Yes, baby. Does this mean more people will believe kids like me now? Danielle knelt in front of him, her voice steady. It means they'll have one less excuse not to. Noah looked away for a second, then smiled shyly. Can I wear the NASA badge to the ceremony? Nathan chuckled from across the room. You have to. You're officially part of the mission now. And he was. Not just of NASA's, but of a deeper, larger mission. The one to make the sky, and the ground below it, a place where every child could walk, speak, and fly without needing to prove their worth. The walk beyond the gate was only the beginning. 3 days after the flight that changed everything, Noah Franklin stood at the edge of a polished stage inside NASA's Kennedy Auditorium, the same hall where his father, Dr. Nathan Franklin, had once presented groundbreaking propulsion data now used in lunar shuttle planning. But this time, the spotlight didn't belong to science alone. It belonged to a story, to a child, to a truth that had flown 35,000 feet and landed in the hearts of millions. The auditorium was filled with aerospace engineers, scientists, families, journalists, and even a few lawmakers. And sitting front row, feet dangling slightly above the floor, was Noah, dressed in a pressed navy blazer, his junior aviator badge pinned beside his name tag. He hadn't said much that morning, but Danielle could tell. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not in the spotlight. Not one of the whispers. Not even flying. He had been through something that had cracked his innocence wide open. But instead of breaking him, it had built something inside him that couldn't be undone. Resilience. Voice. And as Nathan took the stage for his keynote address, not as a victim, but as a father and a visionary, the entire room rose in a standing ovation, not just for his work, but for the quiet dignity with which he had defended his son. And for the ripple that had now become a wave, he began simply. When I was a young engineer, I believed the sky was the ultimate boundary, the edge of possibility. But I've come to understand, through my son, that some boundaries are not physical. Some are invisible, built from bias, maintained by silence. And today, we tear another piece of that down. Silence fell across the room. This isn't just about a moment on a plane, Nathan continued. It's about what we allow and what we challenge. It's about whether we believe children deserve dignity, even when they don't hold the power, especially then. He paused, then turned toward the front row. Noah, thank you. You reminded your father of something important. That progress isn't just in engines or orbits. Sometimes it's in the quiet courage of a child who raises his hand and still asks for kindness. A tear slipped down Danielle's cheek. The audience rose again in quiet, thunderous applause. Later that afternoon, as they stepped into the courtyard behind the auditorium, the family was ushered toward a special unveiling, a new NASA Youth Outreach program, inspired directly by Noah's story. The initiative, called Wings of Respect, would partner with aviation schools, airlines, and youth STEM programs to train not just pilots, but the next generation of inclusive air and space travel professionals. A small bronze plaque at the program entrance read, "In honor of Noah Franklin, who reminded us all that every sky should begin with dignity." Noah stared at it, wide-eyed. He touched the engraved letters with his small fingers and whispered, "That's my name." "Yes," Danielle said softly behind him, "and it belongs here." That evening, back at the hotel, Noah sat on the windowsill looking out at the night sky. The lights of the city below blinked like stars trying to keep up with the real ones above. Nathan joined him quietly. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Noah hesitated, then asked, "Do you think it'll change? Like, for other kids?" Nathan nodded slowly. "It already has. You just may not see it all at once. But one day someone will walk onto a plane and they'll be treated right. Not because the rules changed, but because you changed the conversation." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "I think I want to build something that flies too, but maybe one that sees everyone." Nathan smiled, wrapping his arm gently around his son's shoulder. "That's the best kind of aircraft there is." A week later, back in Savannah, letters began arriving. From teachers, from pilots, from children. Some wrote to thank Noah, others to share their own stories of being overlooked, talked down to, ignored. Some were just drawings of planes with smiling crews, of clouds with words like kindness and justice written on them in crayon. One letter was from a woman named Alyssa, a retired flight attendant in her 70s. It read, "Dear Noah, I served passengers for over 40 years, and I'm deeply sorry for what happened to you. When I was younger, I didn't speak up when I should have. I wish I had your courage. Thank you for making the skies safe for all of us. With respect, Alyssa M." Danielle pinned it to the fridge. It stayed there for months. And Eastern Skies Airlines? Within 2 weeks, the company issued a public apology. Not a polished PR statement, but a video address from their CEO. They announced the suspension of Rachel Moore and the launch of a company-wide program named See Me, Acknowledge and Act, requiring all employees to undergo real-time empathy-based training and community mentorship hours. Their slogan? No seat, no section, no skin color makes anyone invisible. It sparked similar programs across other airlines. Aviation blogs began publishing interviews with black and brown flight crews, asking for the first time what it felt like to serve and be overlooked. The conversation didn't fade. It evolved. Noah didn't become famous. He didn't want to be. But his name, quietly engraved on a NASA plaque and whispered among reform circles in aviation, became a symbol, a reminder, that a boy with soft curls and a heart full of questions had dared to ask for water and received a movement instead. The next time the Franklins boarded a plane, there were no glares, no dismissals, just a smiling flight attendant who bent down, offered Noah a coloring book, and asked what he wanted to be when he grew up. Noah looked at his parents, then answered, "Someone who builds a sky that sees everyone." And this time, the sky didn't look so far away. Moral of the story: discrimination rarely arrives in loud, obvious forms. It often comes quietly, in glances not given, voices not raised, and dignity quietly denied. What happened to Noah Franklin wasn't just about one flight attendant's behavior. It was about a culture that too often allows children, especially black children, to be unseen, unheard, and unprotected in spaces that claim to serve everyone. But Noah's story reminds us that change doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it begins with a small voice asking a simple question, a mother who refuses to let her child be diminished, and a father who turns pain into purpose. When injustice is exposed with grace and truth, it becomes undeniable. And when those who witness it choose to respond with empathy and action, a single moment can evolve into a movement. Let this story be a reminder. Every child deserves to feel safe, respected, and visible, not just in the skies, but in every room, every classroom, every street, and every system. Because real change begins the moment we choose to truly see each other.